I wanted to start with a few announcements, things that are coming up. If you look at the calendar, you can see that today is the only day that we're going to be meeting in Zoom or anything like that. The rest of the week, you're off from class because we have the midterm. So I won't be doing a Zoom on Thursday like we normally would, or on Friday. Friday is a B day, but we will not be having class because I want you to have as much time as possible to study, review, prepare, and take the midterm. So the next time I see you in class will be on the 23rd after spring break. That's going to be after the midterm and after paper number 1 is turned in. So today's really the last day that we have in a live session to go over any of those things in case you have questions. Of course, I'll be available to you during the break and all that stuff during the rest of this week in case you have questions, or you're working on your paper and you want to send me a draft and get some feedback. People have been doing that lately. I've had a few requests for that before the discussions are posted. So you can also send me your discussions and say, hey, would you read through what I have for my post, any recommendations? And I'll say something like, oh, I think it's pretty good, but maybe you could find a better example than this one, or something like that. So those scores have been going up on the ones, obviously, on the ones that are kind of getting some feedback before they submit. So that's always an option for you too. Not only do you have feedback from me after the fact, you can get feedback ahead of time and then adjust, ultimately ending and improving your grade. Attendance this week coming up, you do not need to do anything for attendance. I'm just going to mark everybody present on Thursday and Friday, assuming that everybody is working on their midterm. And we'll talk about the midterm in a few minutes. I wanted to go over that a little bit. I wanted to mention that progress reports go up on Friday. So we only really have one grade. There's a shortened time period because the grades were due a week later for the fourth 6 weeks, and I had to move things around. So there's really only the discussion number 4 that will be in the East grade book for the progress report. So hopefully you did a good job on that one. What else was I going to say? Oh, seniors. I posted the other day and mentioned about the community scholarships. Let me go to the Google Classroom. I mentioned this the other day, but I want to reinforce it in case you weren't here on that day or you just forgot. The community scholarships opened up last week. The community scholarships are the ones where they write you a check and you can put it into your bank account. Most of the other scholarships that you might get just go to your university or your college. They don't you don't ever really see that money in your hand. But the community, different organizations, the schools, churches, and so on, understand that you might need some money to start your college career. You might need to buy a laptop or transportation or books or things like that. And so there are a lot of community scholarships. I mentioned this last week. There's a short video, maybe 5 minutes, of the counselors going through how you can apply to all these community scholarships. They did it like Apply Texas, so it's all in one application. And then when you're finished watching that video, you need to fill out this short Google form. It'll take you 30 seconds to show that you were told about the community scholarship, that you understand that that's an opportunity for you. In other words, that I did my job of presenting it to you, because I've been asked to do that. What else was I going to say about that? That's due on the 26th, which is the Friday we get back from spring break at noon. It automatically closes. So you'll want to make sure that you get in there and complete those applications. It's free money. I don't know anybody who turns down free money. So the application is pretty simple, and the essay question is really topic A from Apply Texas. So if you did that one, you basically have the essay already written. Are there any questions about that? I don't see anything in the chat. So I think that's it. I think that's all of the announcement type things that I had for you today. So before we get into book 2 of Paradise Lost, I would like to know if you have any questions about the midterm. I've been going over this for a few weeks now. This study guide has been available to you for 2 weeks or so, but I just wondered if coming closer to the test opens tomorrow at 8 a.m. So on the 10th is when the window opens, and the window closes at 11:59 on Saturday. So somewhere in there, you need to find some time. I would not try to sandwich it between 2 classes. I wouldn't try to sandwich it between 2 obligations. Like, I'm going to start this at 5, but I have to be at work at 7. I wouldn't do that if I were you. You might end up with some unanswered questions. The test is designed so that you can have unlimited time, but you have to do it in one sitting. So it might take you a couple of hours to do the test. I think it would probably take me 2.5 hours to do it if I had to do the test. Is there anything from the study guide that you want me to talk about? You can send a private chat, or you can, and I'll talk about it, or you can put it in the chat. Just a reminder that I've been offering for 2 weeks that if you have an unstable internet situation and you would like to come up to school to take your exam, you're more than welcome to do that. We can make arrangements for you to be in the library or here in my classroom, whatever works for you, so that you have a stable internet connection. So that shouldn't be a reason for not completing the exam on time. If you need to do that, then we can spend some time figuring out. There's 3 days, the next 3 days here in school, that you could come and use the internet here at school to work on that. No questions about the midterm? Well, there are a lot of questions the last 2 periods about studying and stuff. But okay, maybe you guys are all ready. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is essay number 1, which is due on the 21st. So both of those things you'll be turning in between now and the next time I see you. So just a reminder that you can communicate with me through email. You can also use my Google Voice as like my text. You can text me at, oh wait, let me go through this one. It's the exam. I was working on the exam. You can text me at this Google Voice number. You can share your doc with me from Google and I will help you with it, give you feedback, whatever. If you have a problem with the midterm, once you sign on, you can message me and I will respond to you. So same thing with the essay. If you wanted to share a draft, I know that there are 2 people who've already turned in the essay. They're already done with it. It's not due until, it's not due until the 21st, but some people, I guess, wanted to get it out of the way before the midterm and before spring break so they could have their time over spring break and not worry about the paper. So you can turn that in anytime before the 21st. It is available on Blackboard for you to submit whenever you like. I think last week or the week before, I spent some time going over each one of the 5 topics for Othello. I introduced them sort of briefly the week before that. I think it was on the 26th that I spent time in class, a good 20 minutes or so, going over each one of the options. After we finished Othello Act 5, I kind of said, you know, if you have, let me go through each one of these and give you some ideas and, you know, what the question is asking and so on. So if you weren't here for that class, or if you forgot, or if you kind of said to yourself, I'm going to worry about that paper later, you can go back to the video of the 26th, probably either on the YouTube playlist, which you can also get here on this main page right here, or also I link them in the content material. So in the course content, I think you have to use the table of contents, but in the, yeah, down here is where I will put in links to all the videos from that unit. So like today, I'll put this one in. So you can go back to the 26th and see about all those topics. Reminder, there is the option to come up with your own topic, but you need to talk to me about that ahead of time. Send me an email, explain what it is that you want to explore about Othello, and I will help you refine that. It will not be acceptable to just turn in a paper with an alternative topic. That's not one of these 5. If you do that without talking to me first about your topic, I will make you redo the paper and I will make you do one of the 5. So if you have an idea, I think that's great. I think it's actually preferred that you're thinking about your text and you've got your own topic in mind, but you do need to send it to me and get my approval before you go ahead and write that paper. So I might have something I want you to add, or some aspect that we want to refine. So keep that in mind. Also remember that this is not a research paper. You should not have any quoting from any outside sources. The only quoting that should be happening is from the play Othello itself. You can quote from the play. You might also, if you're doing topic 1, quote from a sonnet, because you have to compare them to the monologues and soliloquies in the play. But that should be it, only primary texts. If you research something outside of the, to get information for yourself, that's fine, but you shouldn't be using that outside information in your paper. This is a paper from your own mindset, from your own idea set. So questions on essay number 1? That one is due on the 21st. All right, well, if you think of something, you can put it in the chat and I will deal with it before we finish for today. Note that the paper comes in, or is due, the last date to turn it in is the 21st of March. I'm fairly firm on that. I don't think that anybody should be asking for any extensions on that, since I already pushed it back 3 weeks from its original time. So make sure that you're on target with that. I am going to be available during spring break. Also, the week after spring break, I'm going to be out of town both of those weeks. But I will still look at your rough draft ahead of time if you want. Don't feel like you are interrupting me or intruding on my spring break. I'm visiting my family. I stay with my parents. They're old. They go to bed at like 9 o'clock. I don't. So I can definitely look at a rough draft or a partial draft, an intro, if you want some feedback before you write the whole paper. Like say you write 1 page, you get going, you just want to double check that you're on the right path. You can certainly share that with me over spring break or anytime, and I will look at it and give you some feedback. I think that, somewhere toward Friday of that week will be like the cutoff of where I'll be able to respond to rough drafts. So I don't like to say right up to the due date, because then it encourages people to, get me to fix all their stuff before their finals due. But yeah, up until maybe Friday the 19th, I'll look at rough drafts, whatever you would like. And then you still have some time to turn it in on time. But same thing the following week. If you have questions about the material or the discussion, I'm going to be available. Oops. I'm going to be available, and we will have class on the 23rd. There'll be a live class. I just won't be here in Weslaco. I wanted to take an extra week to be with my family. I haven't seen them since Christmas 2019. So I'm going to be visiting with them for those 2 weeks, but I will come on and do a live class period on the 23rd, just like usual, to get us started on Gulliver's Travels. I may do a video or something for the second part here, but let's see how that week goes. But we will be having class. I'll be out of town, but it doesn't really matter to you, because if I'm here on Zoom, that's all that really needs to happen, right? And then we have discussion number 5 due. This is also the same day that the application for the community scholarships is due. Anyway, so don't worry about interrupting me if you need some help. All right, I want to start with Paradise Lost Book 2 then. You should have already read that for today, so I want to go over the basics for that. You can find this slideshow if you want your own copy of the slideshow right here. I put it under other materials in this unit. It's very similar to the one that I did last week for book 1. We're only reading the first 2 books of Paradise Lost, which is just a little sample, a little, dipping your toe in the water type thing. But I do want to give you some background, talk about the study guide a little bit, and then we'll be finished for today. So in this little short slideshow, I have these basic concepts. So we were talking about these with book 1, and they do continue into book 2. As a matter of fact, they encompass the entire work. So ideas like hierarchy, great chain of being, disobedience, free will, predestination, sin, all of those concepts are interwoven into the text at large. We're not reading the whole text, but those concepts extend all the way into the rest of the text. And they're also concepts that I'm touching on because some of them are on the midterm. Do you remember when I gave you the Othello study guides? And at the end of each one was a list of 10 different concepts that you should be thinking about how they're woven into Othello. That's because there are some questions on the midterm that will ask you to do that very thing. And if you've already thought about jealousy and how it applies to the storyline and the characters, then you're a step ahead if that shows up on the midterm. Your topics are going to be random out of a bank, but then you already have an idea. Same thing here with these key concepts in Paradise Lost. So if you can write, a 10-sentence explanation of how hierarchy and order is crucial to the concepts that are presented in Paradise Lost, then maybe you're going to get a question like that. So whenever I'm pulling out a list and kind of like harping on them from section to section, they're probably significant enough to show up on a midterm. So I'm going to hear me talk about all of these things as we go through book 2. There are 2 quotations that I pulled out of the text to discuss here with book 2 that kind of encompass all those concepts. The one is the narrator, who is talking about sort of the beginning part, maybe the first third of book 2, where all of the devils are sort of discussing the different avenues that they could go into in terms of continuing their battle with God. And so the text says, "Thus Beelzebub pleaded his devilish counsel, first devised by Satan and in part proposed, for whence but from the author of all ill could spring so deep a malice to confound the race of mankind in one root, and earth with hell to mingle and involve, done all to spite the great creator, but their spite still serves his glory to augment." So this is the narrator talking about how after several other demons get up to talk about what their opinions are in terms of how they should continue to fight God, Beelzebub gets up and proposes the idea that they decide to go with, which is really planted by Satan. It says first devised by Satan and in part proposed. Satan planted the idea in Beelzebub's mind, and I'll be talking about that when I go through the study guide a little bit, but so that it looks more democratic. It looks like, oh, here's a bunch of different ideas. Oh, you like Beelzebub's idea, but it's really Satan's idea and it's the one he wants to do. So Satan is, not surprisingly, manipulative, and I'll talk about other ways that he manipulates the demons and the situation. So this quotation also talks about down here, no matter what Satan and these, fallen angels decide to do to spite God and to, get their anger, take their anger out on him, it says their spite still serves his glory to augment. That's the narrator speaking. And that means that no matter what they do, God will always win. And that's kind of like the main idea of Paradise Lost. It's a long game, but no matter what any of, Satan or any of these other fallen angels or humans, no matter what they do, God always wins. And so his glory is always augmented or increased. And the reason that Milton can say that is because ultimately there's this fall in the Garden of Eden where the humans give in to the corruption and temptation of Satan and go against God. But ultimately, God, sooner or later, comes back around and ends up besting that situation. And what's referenced there is the fact that God will end up winning because he'll send his son to redeem the human race. So ultimately, God ends up winning no matter what. So these devils that have been kicked out of heaven, they're not trying to win against God anymore. They talk about it for a minute, but only one of the demons really suggests that idea. The rest of them, they just want to be a thorn in God's side and trouble him. So, but his glory will always come to the top. So I got some messages, especially in the absence formatives, where people were like, is this a devil book? Is this, Satanism? Because it opens on Satan and his creation of pandemonium, and he's there in hell, and it does kind of seem like that. But ultimately, the work will shift, and we'll see how the humans go against God, and it's sort of like that perspective of that biblical story. The second quote from book 2 that I pulled out is part of a flashback. Toward the end of the text, there's a flash of book 2. There's a flashback about God talking about free will. And Milton asserts through God's voice in the text that free will is something that he's offering human beings, and it's therefore their choice whether they will uphold his rule or disobey him. It says, if him by force he can destroy, or worse, him is Satan, by some false guile pervert, and shall pervert, for man will hearken to his glozing lies, and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience. So he knows that the humans are going to, before he even creates the humans, he knows that they are going to succumb to the temptations of sin. He already knows that before he creates them, because he says, man will hearken to his glozing lies, his being Satan, and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience. So will fall, he and his faithless progeny. So all of humans will fall out of his good graces. And whose fault is it? Whose but his own? Ingrate, he had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. So God kind of says, if the human beings have to suffer because of their transgression against me and their disobedience, it's only their own fault. I gave them everything. I gave them a garden where they didn't need to clothe themselves or shelter themselves. They had plenty of food. They ruined it, not me. I gave them free will, and they chose to disobey me, or they will choose to disobey me. They're ungrateful. An ingrate is a person who is ungrateful. So he is talking about the concept of free will there, which goes back to that original slide that we talked about, this one, right? The idea of free will versus predestination. In some ways, it seems like that's in competition. How can everything be preordained, but we have the choices? So that's a little bit of a conflict that's present in the text. But overall, God sort of resolves that by saying, I know what they're going to do. I haven't set it in stone. I just know what they're going to do because of their free will. So I have another slide on here, but I'm going to come to it when I'm going to come to it when we go through the study guide a little bit, because it's a little complicated, but it's a good reference point for I'm going to close the study guide. All right, so let's go through the study guide a little bit. If you haven't downloaded this, you might want to. I'm going to talk about these elements here on the side over here, so you can add your own notes as we go, if you like. And to what I'm saying, I put kind of like the basics on there already, and you can add details. It's hard for me to type while I'm talking. All right, so book 2 opens pretty much on the cliffhanger of book 1. At the end of book 1, all the demons have pulled themselves out of the flaming lake, and they have started to convene. They've created pandemonium, which you could see depicted by some artist's idea of what pandemonium looks like here. You've got the raging river of fire, right? So it's kind of like their Congress. And so they've built all that stuff, and they enter pandemonium. They sit down, and it's like, okay, Satan was about to speak. End of book 1. And at the beginning of book 2, it picks up right at that moment. And so they're all seated there in this evil Congress, and Satan starts talking to them about how it's not over. that here they are, living in this environment that they don't enjoy and they're in pain about it, but that they have some decisions to make. And he says we could still fight God. There are lots of ways that we could do that. So he kind of opens it up for a debate about how the different, the choices that they have for how they can get back at God. And so different demons kind of get up and give their idea of what they should do next. And Moloch is the first one. Moloch was one of the fiercest fighters in the original rebellion. And so he says, well, we should just go back and fight him again. Like we're still here. We can go back and, knock on the gates of heaven and try to battle them again. At the very least, even if they don't open the gates of heaven, we would at least disrupt them and all of their peace there in heaven. And we would still be kind of, fighting against God in that way. And so that's his point. Belial is the next one, and Belial is the exact opposite. Belial says, look, I feel like we should just accept our defeat. We should, lick our wounds and stay here. God could do a lot worse to us than what we're experiencing right now. Besides, he might change his mind later, and, we should just wait it out, make the best of it kind of thing. So that's the exact opposite, like rhetorically, that's the exact opposite of what Moloch wants to say. So all of the devils have to kind of like weigh their preferences and so on. Now, all of this is a little bit of a satire, because I put it up here in this first one just so you could get the idea of it. They don't really have, it's not a real debate. Satan's going to win because Satan's going to be the decision maker, and Satan has already put the idea into Beelzebub's mind to present. So it's an undermined debate. It's already, he's his sort of, he's already given the idea of what he wants to happen. And so he feigns democracy by saying, all right, what would you like to say about our choices? And he makes it seem like, oh, let's have a viable discussion. But he's already decided what he wants to do, and he's planted Beelzebub to be one of the speakers so that he can present Satan's idea, and then Satan will go, that's a marvelous idea. So it's a satire on the political debates at the time, how they're swayed. And, you could probably argue that even in modern day today. People can debate all they want, but what happens in Congress is people vote for their party, basically, is what we see nowadays. So after Belial, then Mammon gets up, and Mammon is another word for like greed. And Mammon says, I don't think it's a good idea to fight, but we can make the best of it here. So he kind of agrees with Belial. And he says, what we could do is make our own new world, right? We can dig for minerals. If we made pandemonium, then we can make a whole society here, and we can make a heaven of hell, basically, if you want to refer back to the idea that was in book 1. And we can make it something that's enjoyable for us here. We don't have to worry and trouble God anymore, and we can just exist in our own plane now. And people seem to like that idea. Not people, the other demons seem to like that idea, until Beelzebub gets up and he calls it an easier enterprise. He says, you know what? We can do something in between. We don't have to fight back, and we don't have to give up. Instead, what we can do is corrupt God's creation. They know, it's not explained how they know, but they know that God is going to be creating human beings. Hasn't happened yet. You're supposed to imagine, in Milton's world that he's created here, that there's heaven that is lit up, and it's always above everything because of the great chain of being where they used to live. And there's gates on that. And then there's this hellish place where all these demons have ended up. And then there's all this stuff in between. And Satan actually has to go through that, fly through that. And it's a big ordeal toward the end of book 2. But there's this unformed sort of chaos of gases and like heavenly debris type stuff, because God hasn't created the earth yet. He will. And but they know that he's going to be creating human beings and the earth. And so Beelzebub's suggestion, which is really Satan's suggestion, is, hey, why don't we just, everything God tries to do, why don't we just mess it up? Why don't we just corrupt everything that God tries to do with sin and despair and hatred? And then we'll always be kind of like poking at God. We'll always be, kind of like fighting back against him without fighting back against him. And everybody loves this idea. All these demons think that's fantastic. And so then they go, all right, well, who's going to go do it? And just like a Zoom call, crickets. Nobody wants to volunteer. So finally, Satan, because somebody's going to have to go up into that abyss and try to figure out where is Earth and how can we corrupt God's humans and all that stuff. So finally, Satan probably knew that nobody would volunteer, and he says, let me be the one who goes. I should do it. I'm the one who got us to this position for leading the rebellion. And it's totally hypocritical, the reason why he does it. He makes it seem like it's sacrificial, but mainly he does it so that he can solidify his position as the leader in hell. They never voted, right? In terms of hierarchy, they never said, oh, now that we've all been cast out, who should be in charge? They just automatically sort of accepted Satan as the leader, maybe because he was the leader of the rebellion. But it's not like they've had a democratic, sort of discussion or voting or anything like that. So he's solidifying his position by agreeing to sacrifice and go and try to find, go through this ether and try to figure out where the humans are and what God's creation is and so on. So toward the end of the book, they all sort of, say, oh, that's great, Satan, you can go do that. He says, all right, while I'm gone, you guys fix up the place. Try to make it, I forget how he says it, something more hospitable. Make it so that it's more comfortable here for us. So some of the demons go immediately to start scratching around, and they try to make more structures. They're trying to build their little world. Others go and just sort of like cry. Oh, we're so sad. Look at what's happened to us. Maybe they regret their decision to back Satan in the rebellion. And there are some other ones that go out and they start flying over to see the landscape of the area where they are. And one of the things that they fly over, I think I put it here in the study guide. Yeah, right here. So other devils fly over the rivers, Styx, Acheron, Cocytus, and Phlegethon. And what that reference is, because you may not know that reference, it goes to mythology. So Milton is using mythology. Those are all rivers in the underworld in Greek mythology. So here's a map. This map is supposed to be showing the different pathways of the different humans that have entered the land of the dead, the underworld in Greek mythology, but it kind of shows the landscape of it. So when Milton has these demons fly over those rivers, he's for sure connecting that up with Greek mythology and classical literature, because he refers to the 5 different rivers, and you can see them in here. Here's the river Lethe, that's the river of forgetfulness. So the way that the underworld works, I don't know if you guys have studied mythology, the way that the underworld works in Greek mythology is that it's not preferable to life. The afterlife for the ancient Greek people was not better than living. Living was the best thing. But if you had to select where you wanted to go in the afterlife, because obviously they died, you would prefer to go to the Elysian fields over here. But you can see that you have to go through, you land sort of like here, you have to go through all kinds of issues, trials and tribulations to get across. You have to have coins on your eyes to go across the river Styx. And you end up with Cerberus, which is this dog, this 3-headed dog that barks at you. And you end up at the plane of judgment. If your life has been a good life, then you can go over here to the Elysian fields. You go through the Palace of Hades, and you can go into the Elysian fields, which is kind of like heaven. It's all in the same spot, but like this part is sort of heaven. And that's where souls get reincarnated. They drink from the river Lethe, which is mentioned there in Milton, and then they forget their previous life and they can be born into another human being in this ancient belief. If you were bad, then you had to go to Tartarus, and you could see that it's surrounded by the river of fire, so you know that's not going to be good. And it looks a lot like this, right? So there were punishments there. People who were bad, the souls, they call them the shades in Greek mythology, that got sent there were punished for a period of time. Usually the punishment fit the crime. And eventually they were released and they could try to make it to Elysian fields, but they generally just sort of suffered there. So when Milton says that, he's on purpose bringing up that mythological reference. And he'll do it again in a little bit. I'll talk to you about that. So those demons stay behind, and now we shift gears and Satan starts flying off to go and try to figure out through all the chaos, where is this creation that God's working on? And he has to try to get out of hell. The problem is that there are 9 gates on hell, and they're guarded by these weird creatures and these crazy dogs. So he tries to get out, but there's all these gates, and there are 2 figures, a woman ish creature who's sort of like woman from the waist up, and the waist down she's a serpent. She's there at the gate, and then there's this like weird shadowy figure that's there at the gate. And so when Satan approaches these locked gates that God closed up and told these 2 don't let him out, and he's got to try to get his way out so that he can go on his mission. So he's angry that there are these guards, and he confronts them, but the dark one, who turns out to be Death, just sort of like makes fun of him for losing the battle with God. And so Satan gets really angry and is going to start a fight with Death. He doesn't know that it's Death. But the other figure, the female figure, intercedes, and she tells him a little story about who they are. And it's sin and death. So sin is the female snake thing. She's really gross. She's messy, and if you read all the way through the end of book 2, you know that she's the daughter of Satan. So Satan, when he was Lucifer, was in heaven, and she is his daughter. She popped out of his forehead one day and was an angel there in heaven. And that's a definite reference also to mythology. If you know your mythology, you know that Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, popped out of the out of the forehead of Zeus one day. So it's definitely a reference to that. And she was living with them there in heaven, and then she was, you know, an angel like character, and she, you know, existed. But when Satan rebelled against God, he sort of he raped her. She was his daughter. Well, they're not real characters, right? And he impregnated her. Satan doesn't remember any of this, and she says that she gave birth to the shadowy figure, which is Death. So it's an allegory, right? The idea that evil and sin equal death. So you're going to die and be sad if you live in that world, kind of thing. So it gets worse, because she says after the war broke out, God banished her as well. And there she is as the gatekeeper. She's got the keys that are to the gates, and she's there with her son, Death. And Death has also raped her, and she gave birth to some crazy howling, like carnivorous dogs that are always like circling around her. At night, they go up inside her, back inside her to sleep, and they gnaw at her insides. Nothing is pleasant about hell. So it's important to remember that. And so she tells this whole story to Satan, and Satan says, well, you must really be mad at God. Guess what? So am I. I'm leaving right now to go and find out about his creation so that I can destroy it. And she goes, oh, really? That's a good idea. So she unlocks the gates basically and lets him out. And he, even though God told her, don't do that. So Satan leaves, but he has a hard time flying. He's disoriented. The winds kind of like grasp him and push him down. He has this difficult journey to try to learn how to orient himself in this chaos. And he runs into several other characters. I think I stopped making notes somewhere around here because it's hard to take notes and talk. He runs into chance, confusion, and discord, and speaks to them and kind of wants directions, right? So he kind of says, which way to the earth? Or the humans that God's creating, and they point in the direction. And Chaos even tells him, go and have some fun over there. And so he's kind of encouraged, and he has trouble getting there. Eventually, there's some more mythological references. Milton compares Satan's journey of trying to fly through this chaos to the voyage of Odysseus after the Trojan War, which was a 10-year voyage full of trials and tribulations. And so eventually he figures out how to fly through that stuff, and he starts heading toward this sort of light beam that exists. And so he's heading toward that, and we get the end of book 2 with Satan kind of like approaching the location where God is creating the earth. So the idea is that for the rest of the text, what's going to happen is he's going to check that out, sort of reconnoiter, see what's going on there in God's creation. It's not done yet. So he is going to wait until everything's formed, and then he will do that biblical temptation that we see in the Garden of Eden in the Bible. And he will tempt them, and they will be expelled. So the rest of the text is about how Satan does that and causes the downfall of man. And that's pretty much the end of that's the short version of Paradise Lost. Are there any questions? Is there anything that you read in book 2 that might not be on the study guide, but you wanted to ask me about? I think I touched on everything on the study guide. All right, well, I don't see anything over there, so let me just wrap up. If you have any questions on the midterm or the essay or Paradise Lost or anything else, you can communicate with me. The midterm opens tomorrow, closes on Saturday, and the paper is due on the 21st. So the next time I will see you in class will be on the 23rd of March, the Tuesday that we get back. So we'll have a Zoom call on that day, unless you hear from me that there's some issue. All right, any questions? All right, good luck on the test. Have a good spring break, and I will see you after we get back. Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Bye, have a good
Bye,
day.
Miss.
Bye.